we're having some IT problems. Senator Grassley, are you out there? All right, then we will go next to Senator Brown and then Senator Cassidy. Senator Brown. Senator Cassidy.
Great, thank you. Professor Brown, a couple things. I want to make sure that Democrats speak to, hopefully my Democratic colleagues will speak to some of the Republican witnesses, but I want to speak to some of the Democratic. My Democratic Senate colleague have made repeal of the SALT tax provision kind of like as one set of red line. But it sounds like you would disagree with their advocacy for this, since as Mr. Hawkins pointed out, by the way, great to see you, Mr. Hawkins. We used to sit next to each other. As Mr. Hawkins points out, the benefit of that accrues to the extremely wealthy, principally, and those folks typically are not African American. So would you disagree with my Senate colleagues as regards the wisdom of repealing the SALT tax?
Yes, and I'd say you have perhaps read my testimony closely. That's exactly what I would do. And here's the thing, right now we've got about 10.
Hang on, I just got 5 minutes, I gotta go. I just wanted to get that for the record, thank you. Miss Rao, and I'm just curious, I'm not challenging, but your testimony suggests that the inability of women and others to raise money, people of color. I noticed that Ms. Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. I think I see that she's raised $815 million in political contributions since 2002. That's a lot of money. Could you have a sense of why she can raise so much money, and yet your testimony is along the lines of it's difficult for someone like you to raise money? It doesn't seem as if there's been a barrier, if you will, as for her. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Thank you so much, Senator. I think one of the fundamental differences is that for people of color and women, they need to reach a certain level of notoriety or of a certain level in which they are seen as someone who's credible before they can reach that access to capital. Whereas founders that are white don't have to reach that same threshold of credibility before they're able to access. So to your exact point, I think that it has been easy for some individuals, some women, to be able to raise capital, but for the vast majority of women, for myself as a woman of color who's raising a venture capital fund, who doesn't come from generational wealth, it's been extremely difficult because I have to prove myself.
Let me ask, if someone graduated now and she's 24 years old and she graduates, or 26 and she graduates from Harvard Law or has a Harvard MBA or a Stanford MBA, do you feel as if that would be the ticket, the contacts that she would need to have, et cetera, that would allow her to raise more successfully?
I think that there are certainly intersectionalities between race and education and socioeconomic status, as I pointed out in the testimony, that allow and enable some women and some people of color to advance further and maybe quicker. But my point in that is that maybe we need better representation of different types of diversity. And
I get that. I accept that. Believe me. But it does seem as if you subtracted out the role of gender and race and you inserted, say, a Barack Obama graduating from an Ivy League school, that maybe you would have the range of contacts that others would have. I have to move on. I apologize. Professor, one more time. And by the way, Desai and Hawkins, I loved your testimony. Oh, my gosh, I'm going to pin it on my bulletin board. So much so that's why I'm talking to the others. Professor, one, I agree with you about the step-up basis. I once wondered, why did the Kennedy family continue to have so much wealth when I don't see any of them kind of doing the same entrepreneurship that Joe Kennedy did way back when, loosely defining entrepreneurship. And then I realized it is that stepped up basis for the inheritance in their foundation. So again, we have a point of agreement there as well. But let me ask you something that Dr. Desai mentioned, alluded to, and I may not get this right, Dr. Desai, if so, I apologize. You focus on the privileges, if you will, of folks who have more income in the tax code. But Dr. Desai, whether he said this or not, this is how I drew from it based on my own experience. pointed out that many other programs have an inverse effect. I'm a doctor. I worked in Louisiana's charity hospital system for the uninsured, the poor, and the majority of my patients, 80%, were African American. They were on Medicaid. More were on TANF. More were in public school, supported by tax dollars, as opposed to non-African American children who were tending to pay for their own education in parochial or private. In your analysis, do you look at the mirror image where there is a heck of a lot of benefits that accrue to those of color or those who are less well off disproportionately, not because it's necessarily designed that way, but inherent in the addressing an issue such as healthcare for the uninsured? You're going to capture more of those folks who are, again, less well off no matter what their color, but disproportionately they are of color?
I'm not sure I'm tracking the question. That was a long
so if
question.
you look at it, African Americans are more likely to be on Medicaid, more likely to receive EITC, not in absolute numbers, but as a percent of their total population. And so that is a benefit which accrues to those who are of color, which is financed, if you will, by those who would not be of color. Does your analysis look at that?
So I would say so my response would be, when we think about white Americans who may pay less in taxes but are overly reliant on a court system. So I do think there's a connection between taxes and services, but I think at the basis would be the information. And let
me stop this, because that's off point. And I'll finish with this, Mr. Chairman, that if we're going to say that the benefits of the exemptions benefit those who make more money and they just happen to be white, then it's probably fair to say that the benefits of these social safety net programs accrue to those of color. Frankly, not because they are of color, but because they meet the need otherwise. But that does seem to be the mirror image. It does seem to be something which your research appears to ignore. And whether Dr. Desai meant that when he alluded, I don't know, but that's how I took it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The time of my colleagues expired. Senator Brown.